Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at the IRCGN, the Central Ballistics Lab of the French Gendarmerie, with their gracious permission to take a look at some of the particularly cool rare guns that they have in their collection. Today, we are taking a look at the MAS model of 1948 submachine guns, and this is a whole family of guns. I've got these two up here now, but I've got like 4 more under the table that we will take a look at in sequence, because what we have here is, well, a whole series of developmental iterations that ultimately led to a field trials model that didn't quite get accepted. So if we start at the beginning, at the end of World War II, or really before World War II has even ended, when France is liberated in the fall of 1944, the French army almost immediately starts working on a new small arms program, because they recognize that they went into World War II they didn't have everything prepared that they really wanted to have. And coming out of the war, among other projects, they wanted a new submachine gun. So they'd gone in with the MAS 38 in 7.65 French long. It becomes clear that 9mm parabellum is the standard cartridge. It's what all of the other European armies are using, and it's what France needs to have going forward. So all 3 of the major French arsenals, Etienne, Chatellerault, and Tulle, all start working on submachine gun developments. Now, MAS here, Etienne, specifically starts working on some delayed blowback models. And we have an early version here, and we have a final limited production version here. They would also, interestingly, use the exact same mechanism and much of the same tooling and design for a line of intermediate caliber carbines, but those are a subject for a different video. So let's dig in. Let's start at the early developments and work our way forward to see what the mechanism was and how they evolved it through about a year of development and then early production. Written information on these guns is really pretty scarce, and frankly, some of what I've seen here in the collection, just looking at the existing models, conflicts a bit with what I've seen written down. So I'm going to focus on the things that I can tell directly by looking at guns, and then fill in the gaps where I think I can with written information. So if we begin by looking at the markings here, we have MAS 1948 Type C3. Now, there were originally types A through E. A and B apparently didn't see development. They were sort of, paper designs only, and by the time they started really building guns, they were on the C pattern. So they started with C1, C2, C3, C4, and so on, each of them having minor variations. This is C3, number 11, obviously. Now, a couple of the major design features here. These are all in 9mm parabellum. They have folding magazine wells. So on this one, we have a little catch right here. Pull that back, and you can fold the magazine well forward, like so. These used modified MP40 magazines, and I apologize, but I have 1 magazine for one of the later patterns. I don't have any magazines available that will fit these guns, so you're gonna have to use your imagination there. Sorry. They have charging handles located on the top left. These are non-reciprocating. Move like that. They all have grip safeties on them. And of course, when I depress the grip safety, then I can actually cycle the bolt all the way back. They have ejection port dust covers, and I can go ahead and close up there. And then virtually all of them have some form of folding stock, and the most common, at least in the collection here at the IRCGN, is the side folding solid wood stock. So if I push this button in, I can then fold the stock around to the side. And as you can see right here, there was originally a hole in the side of the stock so that with the bolt handle fully forward, it could rest, like the stock would nest onto the bolt handle, but obviously that didn't quite work and ended up breaking the stock here. Again, this is a whole series of experimental developmental designs, so you're going to see a lot of things that turned out not to be such great ideas. I really like the disassembly method on the 1948. It varies a little bit on the different patterns, but they're all kind of fundamentally the same basic idea. I have this pin on the side, and I unscrew that, and you can see it's locking the internals in place. I pull it out. I don't have to worry about a spring popping out. I then just have to unhook the magazine well right there, and then kind of like the MAS 38, the whole grip frame comes out. In fact, you can see that the grip on this is very reminiscent of the MAS 38. It's relatively short. Like, I can get about 2.5 fingers on it, which is pretty similar to the MAS 38. We have our fire control group built in place here. So once you depress the grip safety, that's the grip safety right there. Depress that down, and then when you pull the trigger, the sear drops. That's all there is to it. With the back end off of the gun, I can take the charging handle, pop it backwards, and pull out all of the operating parts. So what we have here is a spring tube. So this is kind of like an AK in that the captive recoil spring lives up inside the top of this. This is there largely for mass. We have a two-part system here. The bottom is the bolt face. And one of the really interesting things about the MAS 48 is that this can be assembled wrong. And this, in fact, is assembled wrong. So let me fix it really quick. I'm just going to push this pin out. I'm going to flip this piece around. And now it is correct. So the way this system works is that the firing pin is right there, and it's connected to the top part of this two-piece assembly. The bolt head itself slides on a pair of rails, and when it goes all the way back, the firing pin is protruding forward, and it fires. There's no spring in here. As soon as these are together, they fire. And the spring is pushing up here. So the way it looks is the firing pin's forward, and as this cycles forward, picking up around from the magazine, firing pin's already exposed, except it's not. That's the point of this little lever that you saw me fix. Now you can see that lever runs up inside the top right there. And the idea here is that this lever in order for the lever to go down, in order for the firing pin to come forward, you have to have space for these two lugs, or this single lug, to protrude down into the receiver. So as long as it's on a solid flat surface, it's locked in this position, the firing pin isn't forward and can't come forward. That's the safety mechanism. Once it's fully in battery, there's a cutout in the receiver, in the bottom of the receiver, where this can push in. That allows the firing pin to come forward and fires. This also doubles as the delaying mechanism. So when it does then fire, pressure is of course going to push backwards on the bolt face here. But because this is locked into the bottom of the receiver, it can't travel backwards. Instead, the force on this is going to act, basically using this lug, this guy, as a lever. It's going to force this top element with all of its mass and its spring in there to come backwards. And only when this has retracted all the way up into the bolt can the whole thing cycle backwards. So it is a lever delayed, you could say a precursor to the FAMAS, but a lever delayed 9mm submachine gun. Unfortunately, there's really no angle that I can get in to show you, but the cutout for that lever is in the top of this block. So when the bolt goes all the way forward, there's our lever right there. So when I push this in, right there, you can see this part moving forward after the bolt's all the way in battery. That is because the lever has retreated down into its recess in this block. So that's the basic pattern that most of the development is going to follow, but there will be a bunch of alternative directions that are experimented with, like this one. So this is very much taking the idea of the underfolding paratrooper CR39 version of the MAS 36 bolt action rifle and applying that style of stock to this action. So you can, based on the markings, this is caliber 9mm, MAS 1948 Type E, serial number 1, and 1E also on the grip assembly. So you can see back here we have the same sort of lever disassembly. This all comes apart the exact same way, but we now have an underfolding metal stock. There's a little tab in it right here. When I push that down, it is stiff, but I can unfold the stock and it snaps in place right there, and voila, we have a carbine, a submachine gun, ready to shoot. There's this little tab right here acts as the ejection port cover because there's no space to have this sticking out the side anymore. So if I fold this back up, you can see that is going to cover the ejection port there. The front end nests down into the stock just like basically just like a CR39 stock did. And the stock actually locks into this little divot in the receiver. So if we look on the underside, right about there, there's our locking tab. I can push it down, and this section right here snaps into that. Oop, right there. Not particularly secure. This isn't actually a very good system, and it would not be used, in the long term. Oh, by the way, that's for the sling on this side. Connects to that little hook on the bottom. This would not be a standardized pattern, but it's one they experiment with. And you can see here, this still has the short grip, like the MAS 38 that we have on the early C1s. This next one is the MAS 48 Type C4. This is number 2 of the C4 pattern, but we've now moved to the next iteration. One complaint is that the grip is too small, and so the next iteration is going to have a longer grip. We have the same basic overall construction, same mechanism inside, but the grip has been made longer, and you can see here that the magazine well has been reinforced. This folding mechanism still works the same way. We have a latch on the back here. I pull that latch back, and I can rotate the magazine well forward. The actual magazine release button is right there. And this was a very popular mechanism with the French Army. This allowed the guns to be carried completely safe, because when you've got the magazine forward, there's no way around can make it into the chamber, so you don't have to have a manual safety on the gun. Of course, they do have grip safeties on them, but you can transport the guns with loaded magazines ready to fire very quickly without actually having to worry about discharges. So it's a cool, clever system. And then, of course, we still have the same basic folding stock here. They've shortened the stock, or moved the charging handle so that it's not trying to actually nest inside the stock. But now, that's a really compact package. Magazine sticks forward. This would be super easy for paratroopers to use. You can stick this in a bag or, in any number of places easily. But once you unfold it, you have a nice solid full stock for a good cheek weld. The rear sights remain the same here, so we have a 100 meter and 200 meter apertures that you can flip between. You actually have a pretty good sight picture on these, which is really nice. On the C3, you got just a plain square lug of a front sight with a little notch cut in it for a precision sight. On the C4, they add a protective hood to it. They have also substantially strengthened the sling attachments, so we've got a fairly large hook there up on the gas tube, and a sling bar in the stock back here. Note that the construction has also been simplified, so on the C3 here, we have a fairly complex, well, not complex, but we have a milled slot cut in the side of the receiver to take this charging handle. On the C4, they realize, you know what, we can just kind of have this ride on the outside. It means there's less place for debris to collect. It's a much simpler stamped component. So there's the open slot in the receiver, and this just sits on top of it. A much better grip. I now have a little space below the third finger, so that's a nice improvement. This is mechanical, like I said, mechanically identical inside, so I'm not going to take this one apart, but they've made a number of improvements. And now we come to the limited production version. So at this point, the development has progressed enough that the French Army is interested in actually testing these out. And so they start making them in larger numbers. Note that we still have an NO here. So this isn't like full mass production where it would start to get a letter prefix. This is still limited pre-production. But it is now MAS model 1948 caliber 9mm, no evidence of any of the other letter designations. So this isn't a C or a D or an E. This is now the standard MAS model 48. And what have they changed on it? Well, we still have this reinforced style of magazine well, but the actual magazine release, or the magazine well release for folding the magazine, has changed. Instead of being a latch underneath, like it was back here, it is now a push button on the side. So I push that in, and I can fold the magazine well forward. The magazine release button is still over here. These are still modified MP40 magazines. It is now painted black. This is basically a heavy black locomotive engine paint that the French Army started using in the 1930s that it found to be very resistant to the effects of heat and humidity, especially in the tropics in places like Indochina. We still have the hooded front sight, but they've actually gone back to upper mounted hooks for the sling. We've got that there. The stock is serialized 314, and it has a roundel. We know this is a French Army acceptance stamp, so it was taken into field trial service in May of, unfortunately, a year that is worn away, but it would have been either 48 or 49. A little latch has been added to the side of the stock here with a button, a matching button on the butt plate. That is to lock the stock in the open or in the closed position. We have a little bracket there. When I fold the stock, you can see that those are going to snap together. So unlike previous versions of the gun, this production model, the stock remains locked in the folded position until I push this button and unfold it. And then they've also changed the takedown method just a bit to get rid of that non-contained loose screw pin that you could, in theory, lose. So we now have a pair of spring catches. The stock screw here is extended, and I believe that's actually deliberately to press this in. So to disassemble this, I'm going to fold the stock so that the back end of the receiver is open and accessible. Make sure the bolt's forward. And then all I have to do is push in on this button, and you can see that the grip starts to come backwards, and I can just pull it completely off. So it's just a pair of spring latches now instead of a cross screw that you could, in theory, lose. And the rest of disassembly remains extremely simple. I just pull the handle back a bit. I can pull out the completely contained mainspring. There's the bolt mechanism, and there's my action and stock. That's it. That is field stripped, ready to clean. All right, there's one more that I want to show you because it's rather different than the others. This is still a standard MOS Model 48, caliber 9mm. Now we're up to serial production number 1626, but again, we still have this NO marking, which means this isn't standardized production. This is still pre-production. And I can just barely fit this whole thing in frame. This is a pattern that they made with a fixed stock, a much extended long barrel, and this is another one of the elements that was experimented with during development, actually putting finger grooves on the magazine well instead of just holding on to like the front of the thing here. They actually have grooves on it. This is something that would be adopted on the MAP 49. And this is the one of these guns that I actually have a magazine for. And it doesn't really fit the others because of this longer magazine well, but you can see here, this is just a straight up MP40 magazine. They've added a stop to it and added a new cut to it there. And the typical ones would have a magazine notch, a locking notch up here instead of down there. Mechanically, this is also the same as the others. Interestingly, we actually have the screw here instead of the plunger. And they've cut out the stock so that you have space to open it. Pull that. And then, just like the other guns, the trigger mechanism comes off. One of the other things that is different about this one is it actually has two triggers. So this is a semi-auto trigger that has a disconnector on it right there, which doesn't want to work for me, but that's the semi-auto trigger. This is the full auto trigger, and it has a lockout button on it. So if you are not supposed to be using full auto, or if you don't want to use full auto, instead of trying to remember which trigger is which, and remember this would be for a right-handed shooter like so, you can just close this button, which locks right behind the full auto trigger, and now you have just semi-auto until it is authorized to swap to full DACA, and then you can unlock it like so. Note that the receiver for this gun has the little notch here, the strap for locking a folding stock in place, so you can tell that they were using the same receivers for both, and they would have had a long-barreled version that did also have a folding stock on it. It's not clear exactly how many of these guns were actually made by the time they got to the series production version. It was over 1,000. It wasn't probably more than a couple thousand, if that. The guns did actually see Army field testing in the fighting in Indochina, and they performed fairly well. The problem was they were delayed blowback, and that meant that they were more complicated designs and more expensive designs to manufacture than the simple blowback guns that would eventually be adopted. Of course, the gun that was chosen was the MAT 49 from the Tulle arsenal. So in a later series of videos, we'll take a look at some of Tulle's prototypes that led to that gun. But the MAS 48 proved to be a very comfortable, very practical, reliable gun, just not cost effective. So very, very cool of the gendarmes to give me the opportunity to take a look at all of these different variations of them and show them to you. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.